Welcome to Catastrophe Chronicles. I'm Arin Babbick, your guide to history's most shocking disasters and geological drama.
And I'm Arin Babbick, the guy who's just here to keep things from sliding out of control.
Good luck with that today, because we are talking about the Frank Slide, Canada's deadliest rock slide and the kind of disaster that really brings the house down.
I'm guessing there's going to be no shortage of rocky puns in this one.
You know me, I like my history like I like my terrain, unstable and prone to unexpected collapses.
Sounds about right. So what happened in Frank, Alberta that left part of a mountain scattered across a valley floor, and how did an entire town end up between a rock and a hard place?
Stay tuned, because we're about to dig deep into the story of the Frank Slide, and trust me, it's quite the avalanche of events. Hello, everyone. Welcome back for another week of Catastrophe
Chronicles.
We're so excited to have you guys here. We're excited to be here. We are
Always.
going to Canada this week, which I'm pretty excited about.
Not us physically.
No, in the podcast.
Yes.
I will say, when we did the space disasters episode, Muskie tweeted something about bringing the space shuttle down. So I'm hoping that by the time this releases, it isn't like the space disasters where it suddenly becomes topical the day it releases. So
and we're going to Canada.
If something happens more than the tariffs, I swear I didn't plan it that way. I just thought this was a cool disaster. So hopefully we haven't invaded Canada by the time this starts. Hopefully that never happens. But,
Ever.
I feel
we
like
don't need that.
I low-key predicted a tweet with the space disasters. So, hopefully that doesn't happen here. We'll see. But yeah, I'm excited about it. I have a lot of family in Canada. It's a cool spot. Arin's been to Canada.
Yeah, that's a family in Canada too.
You do? No, you still have family in Canada. Yeah, I remember now. Ooh, that was a moment for me there. Brain fart. But yeah, we're excited about it. We're recording this right after we recorded the Hartford Circus fire, so there's nothing really new to report in our lives, other than the fact that we are still, in fact, alive and happy, and I hope everyone else is as well. It is not after bedtime, so
as
if you
our
hear
children
doors
rumble around,
it's chaos.
Rhinoing through the house.
Since we are featuring a deadly rock slide this week for our drinks, we decided to go with an on the rocks theme.
Simple.
We did. Aaron's having whiskey on the rocks, and I'm having a margarita on the rocks, because we decided to split the difference and make sure both of us were happy this time. Not that we're ever not happy, but yes, I was not about to have whiskey on the rocks. I'm very happy with my margarita.
Good.
On the rocks. And it's not freezing cold outside, so it doesn't feel like I'm just lying to myself. It brings real and actual joy, which is pretty cool. So yeah, do you know anything about Frank Slide, Arin?
I do not.
I don't even think you knew I was doing this one, did you?
No. Well, now that you've mentioned the name of the disaster, I remember you saying something about it, but that's
I'm sure I've talked about it before, because if you're from Canada, and I know we have a few Canadian listeners, I see you all, I peep you on our analytics, you probably already know of this one, at least a little bit. It's one of those that's very prevalent in the zeitgeist of the Canadian mind. Everyone kind of knows about this one, because it was the deadliest avalanche that ever happened in Canadian history.
Oh.
And it is a whole ass thing. So I'm excited to do it. I think it's a cool one.
All right, well, lay it on me.
All right. So our quote this week is, "Whole families were wiped out. Little children were left orphans. The human cost was very high, and we must never forget that." That's Monica Fields, a lifelong resident of the area bordering the Crow's Nest Pass, which is where the avalanche occurred. And she actually works at the interpretive center there for the Frank Slide.
Okay.
So I thought that was a good one, because it, covers it.
Yeah.
Basically, it was
pretty direct.
It was bad.
Yeah.
It was real bad. I thought about going with the landslide one, but I liked having one she's a descendant from a survivor.
Oh, wow.
Her uncle survived the disaster. So, I don't know. I just felt like that was fitting.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're going to go, this disaster happened in 1903. And there was a coal mine involved in it. So we're going to start with kind of going over the history of the area and kind of a little bit of the history of coal mining in Canada, which is quite similar to United States and England, which we've talked about before now. So coal mining in Canada is more than just big business the way it is in a lot of other areas of the world. In many ways, it was one of the core parts of the nation's history and how its economy has grown over time. And not just coal, but energy resources in general.
Okay.
Canada is a big exporter of that. Even today, the United States, 70% of our coal or our oil imports are from Canada.
Oh, wow.
Canada does a lot of mining. It's a very important part of their economy.
Yeah, a lot of natural resources come from there.
Natural resources. And this has been a thing for a long, long time. Canada, like we said, is known for a lot of minerals and resources, and those things have been mined from, well, I wouldn't say the beginning, but the beginning of colonialism and white people existing inside Canada. But that's not to say that the Indigenous people didn't do mining as well, just that most of their mining was far more respectful of nature, didn't cause nearly as much harm.
I mean, we can say the same about the States, too.
Sure. You absolutely could.
With the Indigenous peoples here, too.
100%. We just happen to be talking about Canada.
Absolutely.
So, copper was one of the first things mined in Canada. I'm going to try real hard on this name. Anishinaabe peoples were extracting copper around the Great Lakes at least 6,000 years ago, making it one of the oldest mining operations in North America.
Oh, wow.
Pretty crazy. Soapstone was also collected by Indigenous people near the eastern Canadian coast.
Hey, I got some soapstone right here.
You do?
Yeah.
Native peoples were collecting that soapstone so you could use it in your whiskey on the rocks today.
Literally on the rocks.
Literally on the rocks. Actually, that's very, very fitting. I like that. Lots of little things like that where the Native Americans were mining. And mining is probably not the best term here because when you think of mining, you think of, going underground and digging things out.
Yeah.
And in some cases it was that, but for the most part it was finding them and collecting them versus digging deep into the subterranean ground and collecting them that way.
Right.
Harsher mining that did harm the land didn't start until hundreds of years after those initial mining things that we just talked about. Coal was discovered in Canada by the white people by a man named Gianovi Caboto or John Cabot, which is what he was called when he sailed under the English flag when he found coal in Canada on his 1497 voyage for Henry VII, who is the father of that Henry.
Yeah.
Henry VIII.
Interesting.
Yeah, which marks the beginning of Canadian coal mining and one of the first times that the old world really started looking at the new world as a major source of resources.
Huh.
Interesting little side note. While they did start operations of coal mining at that point, they were small and pretty sporadic. They laid the groundwork, though, for bigger operations and things going on. Iron mining also started shortly after this in the 16th century, which is also when coal mining really started to take off and be more than just these small, tiny operations going on. Into the 19th century, Canada had its own gold rush, much like that of the United States, though a lot of it happened shortly after the United States gold rush. And it was pretty pivotal in shaping the social, economic, and geographical landscape of Canada, along with coal mining. The Fraser River Gold Rush, for example, in 1858 was particularly impactful. Gold was discovered in 1857 and a huge influx of prospectors showed up, many from as far away as California, moving north to try and hit it big. Settlements started to grow quickly with the influx of population, as did the economy, and with that, more coal was needed, so more coal mining started to speed up as well. Coal mining fully took off after what's known as the Confederation period, and the Confederation period is basically when Canada became Canada. On July 1st, 1857, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and the province of Canada joined together to form the Dominion of Canada, and it's now known as Canada Day. July 1st is Canada Day, which is pretty cool.
Oh, nice.
Canada. I'm sure if you're from Canada, you know this, but not everyone does. So I'm just going to throw it out there.
So now I just have a real big fish, or not a real big fish, Five Iron Frenzy song running through my head.
Bless it.
Welcome to Canada. It's a maple leaf state. Sorry.
The coal mining industry spread into Alberta, which is where Frank Slide happened. It wasn't called Alberta then, but it's the Alberta area in the 1890s.
All right.
And this is about when Frank was founded. Frank was founded in 1901. So about 11 years after coal mining really started making its way into Alberta. It's hard to understate how important coal was for the rail and steamship networks, along with machinery made to produce steel. And the obvious, Canada is quite cold. They need things to warm them up. So coal was a pretty crucial part of their economy for a long time. Coal reached its peak in the Canadian economy in consumption in 1920 when 64% of all energy in Canada was fueled by coal.
Hmm.
64%. It's a lot of it. A
That is
lot
a
of
lot.
coal being used.
I wonder if there was any incidents like the London fog with all that coal being used in Canada.
I'm not 100% sure. That would be an interesting thing to look into. I would think, just knowing what I know of weather up north, that it's less likely that it happened there because they have a lot more winds and things moving. They don't have as many weather systems that allow things to get stuck in the atmosphere. There's also, despite the fact that there were more and more people going, it wasn't overcrowded the way a lot of, American cities were.
Yeah,
So,
no, that's right. It's more spread out.
I would guess probably not, but maybe. I don't know. I'd have to look into it. So this real advent of commercial exploitation of coal meant that miners had to work the deposits located underground, getting deeper and deeper, getting more and more dangerous, much like what we talked about with Wales and what we talked about with America in our other 2 coal mining episodes. In the early years of the industry, miners had to cut long tunnels, also called drifts, horizontally from a shaft, and then use the room and pillar method, which is where a section of coal was removed and columns were left to support the mine roof. Not super crazy safe. Such mines were dangerous. There was a number of problems that happened, number of mining accidents. Air circulation had to be maintained at all times, while in many cases, water had to be pumped out of the mines as well. So just having to control the environment inside of the mines, which wasn't going well. With that also came volatile and combustible coal dust and methane gas, which inevitably leads to, you guessed it, coal mine explosions. Despite efforts, and Canada did actually make some real efforts to improve coal mine safety comparatively to the United States, there was still a number of deadly disasters, which leads to, we'll talk about what it leads to in a bit. But there were things like in Nanaimo, I think I said that, Nanaimo, British Columbia in 1887, 150 people died. In Hillcrest, Alberta, 1914, 189 people died.
Damn.
In Spring Hill, Nova Scotia, there was 3 different disasters. In 1891, 125 people died. In 1956, 39 died. And in 1958, when a seismic earthquake caused a pillar to collapse, 74 people died. And those are just a few of the mining disasters that happened.
Damn.
So people were primed and ready to assume mines kill people.
Yep.
Because they did, right?
I mean, it's dangerous work, and anyone who's been around or knows even a small bit about mining knows it's pretty dangerous.
Yeah, for sure. And even up into like the 20th century. Well, the most recent mining disaster in Canada was 1992.
Oh, damn.
1992. 26 miners were killed in Plymouth, Nova Scotia during a mining accident, that's not that long ago. I mean, it's not actually 8 years ago, like it feels like in my head. It's more like 30 years ago.
I mean,
but still.
I remember growing up and occasionally seeing news of miners trapped in some country, lots of, with all the rescue efforts
sure,
going.
You hear about it in like Chile and these other countries, but most of these other countries that you hear about it in are not, fucking Canada. They're not first world countries. So it was definitely surprising to me to find out that the most recent one in Canada was 1992, because that's certainly not something I would expect in the States or in Canada to be happening really past the 50s. But it did, because no matter how many safety standards you have, some work is just dangerous. It is what it is, and this is one of those. So Frank is where this disaster takes place. Frank is a coal mining town in Alberta. Wasn't Alberta at the time. It was just kind of a territory, but it's where Alberta was. And Frank was it was coal town. It was founded on September 10th, 1901. Coal was discovered inside Turtle Mountain, which is just next to Frank, in 1900 by Henry S. Pelletier, who was a sawmill owner. Was a sawmill owner in Blairmore.
I wonder if any relation to our kid's pediatrician.
I don't know. I'll ask her. Pelletier sold his claim, though, to a man named Samuel W. Gibeau, who, along with Henry Frank, who is the town is named after him, opened the mine under their business, the Canadian American Coal and Coke Company, in 1901. And by default, the town opened. And they really wanted to make this a whole thing. They wanted to attract a lot of business. They wanted to attract a lot of workers to the town. So they made the opening of the town and the mine this huge thing. They had a gala. They had a big party. They had fireworks. They imported a ton of ice cream and a ton of food. They had like sporting events going on. They hired the Canadian Pacific Railway to bring 2 special trains to like transport people into town. And they ended up having like 1,400 people show up to the big party. And everyone talked about what a great time it was. It was a big deal.
Sounds like
People
a
were
good party.
very excited about it. Yeah. And by 1903, which is when the disaster took place, the town had boomed, really. There was 600 people living there. 600 people. That's pretty damn quick in 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the boom town also had things like an electric light plant, a water system, a 2-story school, 4 different hotels, and 16 additional business establishments.
Damn.
It was hopping.
Yeah.
It was like hopping
growing.
town. Meanwhile, the mine was doing great as well by 1903. They had penetrated about 5,000 feet into the mountain, ripping out the seam. And the seam was about 13 to 15 feet wide, depending on where you were.
Okay.
The Frank mine bored through all of this limestone and coal with a production of about 1,000 tons of coal per day.
Damn.
So that's happened.
All right.
So let's now talk about Turtle Mountain. Turtle Mountain is where Frank's coal seam is. That's where the mine is.
Okay.
And Turtle Mountain had, I don't know, a special place. There was legends surrounding the mountain by the indigenous people who lived in the area. So Turtle Mountain is in the Crow's Nest Pass area of Alberta, right next to Frank. And there's some contention of how the Crow's Nest Pass, the high mountain pass that crosses the Continental Divide there, got its name.
Okay.
Some stories claim that the name has something to do with literal nests of actual crows.
Okay.
While others maintain that the pass was named after a figurative nests of crow Indians who lived in the area. According to one Blackfoot legend, who's one of the tribes that's indigenous to the area, in 1853, a war party of Blackfoot braves ambushed a group of Crow raiders who had made their way north from Montana. The ensuing battle took place at the base of the mountain, and in the midst of the battle, an enormous rock broke away from the mountain and crushed a little over 200 Blackfoot and Crow warriors.
Oh, damn.
Believing that the rock slide had been a divine sign, the 2 parties quit the battle and vowed never to fight within the valley again. The Blackfoot named the valley the Crow's Nest Pass in honor of the crows who died in battle, and called the mountain that had claimed them the Mountain That Walks. Ever since, Blackfoot and local Crow Native Americans have refused to pitch their teepees within the mountain's vicinity.
Well, yeah, the mountain came down and smote some of them.
We don't know for sure if that actually happened, but that is one of the legends surrounding how the mountain got its name and how Crow's Nest Pass got its name. And the Native Americans do call the mountain either the mountain that walks or the mountain that moves.
That's really cool. Like, I don't know about you, growing up and hearing all these, Native American legends and about all these different tribes and whatnot. I always had it. You just kind of blew my mind in a weird way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I don't know why, but it's probably just the way it's taught. I never pictured them in Canada. Because there were no borders at that point. Like, it didn't matter. Land was land. Like, you went where you needed.
Yeah.
And so, like, I always pictured it within the boundaries of the U.S.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, so such a weird, like, worldview on that, and you just kind of
good. That's a good
broke
shift.
That's
a good shift to have. Yeah, so
I thought it was a pretty cool revelation.
They did not give a shit about where the Canadian-U.S. border was.
Because there wasn't one.
And there's also tribes that are, primarily only in the Canadian area as well, because even when you go further and further north, there's a number of indigenous people.
You mentioned both of those 2 tribes, the Crow and the Blackfoot, and I know of both of those.
Yes, both of them live on both sides. But yeah, there's more than just that. It is interesting. I like that you learned something. Very cool.
I always learned something.
So Turtle Mountain is immediately south of the town of Frank. The mountain was thrust up from the Rocky Mountains about 70 to 80 million years ago, and additional movements created this like V shape of the mountain. Okay. It has essentially 2 peaks. There's a number of smaller peaks as well, but it had 2 peaks when this happened.
Foreshadowing. The mountain that moves.
Then the North Peak was about 7,000 feet high, and the South Peak was about 72,000 feet high. 7,200 feet high. Not 72,000. 7,200 feet high. The mountain itself consists of this like older limestone layer, which is on top of softer materials like shale and sandstone.
Okay.
As the mountain was formed, the once horizontal layers of limestone folded until they were almost vertical, creating this very unstable rock face to the mountains. To make matters worse, a major thrust fault runs through the mountain called literally Turtle Mountain Thrust Fault. Do you know what a thrust fault is? Thrust fault?
I'm imagining it's a fault line that has moved vertical.
Kind of. So when we're talking about plate tectonics, because I'll say this 10,000 times, plate tectonics are real. I'm not going to stop. They're real. I don't care. So the Earth's plates move, right? Depending on what's going on underneath, and different fault lines form as they move against each other. So you might have a convergent one, which is where they're kind of sliding against each other. You might have a convergent. Convergent is when they're coming together. Divergent is when they're moving apart. Yep. You have transverse where they're sliding up against each other. So a thrust fault is a convergent fault line where two plates are coming towards each other. And in a thrust fault, one of the plates is going up over the other one.
Oh, yeah. And the other one's diving down.
It is. That's just straight down. Convergent. But in a thrust fault specifically, that plate that's going up and over is the plate that's moving the most.
Okay.
And it's moving the most at a degree of 45 degrees or more. So it's a very steep fault.
Yeah.
These are some of the most kind of unstable faults we have, and they create some of the biggest mountains that we have. So the Himalaya mountains, for example, are on a thrust fault.
Okay.
That's why they're so damn tall. The Appalachian Mountains were on a thrust fault. They have since kind of moved from it, and that's why the Appalachian Mountains are so damn long, because they extend through basically the whole United States. And there's actually part of the Appalachian Mountains in Europe where the plates separated, but they were on a thrust fault. So before all of the erosion and everything, they would have been very, very tall, like the Himalayas, and now they're old. And when you get older, you get a little shorter.
Yeah.
The Appalachian Mountains they're a little shorter, but they're not quite at diapers yet. It's getting a little older. But Turtle Mountain, thrust fault.
Wow.
I'm not even sorry. This is also known as a dip slip fault. There's another name for it. But it's very steep fault, very near vertical. And for this particular fault, it's at about 82 degrees.
Holy shit.
So right up. To make it even more unstable, there were a number of large cracks along the surface of the summit of the mountain.
Okay.
And when the snow would fall, it would get in there, in deep, and freeze, and then it would melt, and it would cause erosion, and not just the topsoil erosion, deep down into the mountain.
Yeah, because the ice forces it apart, and then the water washes stuff away.
Exactly. Yeah. And the limestone would erode at a slower pace than the shale and sandstone that was underneath.
That makes sense.
Creating, like I said, an even more unstable mountain face. So lots of science into it. But what that all kind of comes down to is essentially Turtle Mountain wanted to fall. Turtle Mountain just needed an excuse. Just look at her funny and she's going to crush you.
Yeah.
And we got deep ass coal mine.
And we're boring holes through it.
The mountain itself gained its name Turtle Mountain by a rancher named Lewis Garnett, who saw in the mountains the face of a turtle with a turtle shell back. So one of the peaks was the turtle heads and the other one was its back. That's why it's called Turtle Mountain, but the indigenous people called it the mountain that walks or the mountain that moves. Just kind of a cool thing. And you would think with the name like Turtle Mountain, it would walk slow, but no. We're going to see. It does not.
You talk about a guy seeing the face of a turtle, and the college I went to initially, the grounds used to be owned by a cult.
No.
Oh yeah.
Really?
No joke.
Your college was also a cult. I just want to point that out. So it's still owned by a cult.
Well, look. So one of the buildings on campus was the house of the lady who ran the cult, Madam Tingley.
You're joking.
Nope.
No.
And she believed that she was going to be reincarnated as a turtle when she died. So she had a ton of turtles, and she built her home with extra short stairs so that her turtles could climb up the stairs, and that when she was reincarnated as a turtle, she would still be able to go up her stairs. And then the main office building on the campus was shaped like a turtle if you look at it from the sky.
I don't know how good this podcast is for our relationship, because now I know that you hung out with clowns. And that you went to college with a turtle lady.
No. She was dead way before I went to college.
No one got rid of her house, though. They just left it there.
No. No,
Was
and
there a lot of turtles that visited the house?
no, there's other stories. I'll tell you other stories later. I don't want to detract from it because this has nothing connection to this
There's no turtles in this story at
subject,
all, anyway.
except for the turtle mountain and the guy seeing the face of a turtle in the mountain. That's all. That's the only connection. This is my ADHD brain. Sorry.
I don't even know. All right. I love you.
I love you too.
April 29th, 1903, at 4:10 in the morning, less than 2 years after the town had formed. The preceding months, leading up to April 29th, had a number of warning signs that, as usual, no one paid any fucking attention to.
Yep, that checks. Sounds familiar.
Smaller rocks routinely rained down, especially when there was a thaw. When the snowmelt would come down, it would flow down the mountain along with tiny rock slides. Miners working within the coal seam on Turtle Mountain reported strange crackings and rumblings. Upraises of freshly mined coal closed overnight.
Oh, that's not good.
No, there was excessive slippage of coal from the mine walls. Sometimes they would find that the 2-foot timbers they used to prop up the ceiling had splintered into pieces overnight. And on certain nights between the hours of 1 and 3 in the morning, the mine was beset by slight tremors akin to, quote, the starting and shuddering of a ship truck by a wave.
I wouldn't be in that mine.
They were in that mine, though.
Yeah, I wouldn't be.
So the snowmelt had also melted early that year in about February, and it had all come down the mountain.
Oh, that's pretty early.
And the night before, it had snowed and frozen on April 28th. It was a spring cold snap, and everything froze up inside of those cracks, and the mountain just kind of gave up that morning.
Yeah.
At 4:10 a.m., a giant section of limestone broke away from the mountain and slid down into the community of Frank through Crow's Nest Pass. The rock slide lasted for about 100 seconds and completely obliterated the eastern section of the town, killing somewhere between 60 and 110-ish people, many of which were buried alive. The rock slide itself was a total of 0.6 miles long, 1,600 feet wide, and 500 feet deep. It weighed
500 feet deep?
In many places.
Jesus Christ.
110 million tons worth of rocks that slid off the mountain at once in under 2 minutes.
You're not digging people out of that one.
Nope. Based on how far the rocks extended across the Crow's Nest Valley, scientists estimate that the rocks were moving at speeds of up to 70 miles per hour, and therefore would have been flowing very similarly to a river with no chance of getting out of the way, essentially.
You're not running from it either. That's good God.
Ahead of the mass of rock itself was a massive wave of air that was so strong that it alone toppled a number of flimsy houses, shacks, tents. It hurled men, women, and children hundreds of yards before the rocks even got to them. The slide ripped over the Crow's Nest River and through the eastern outskirts of Frank, obliterating the bridge, a power plant, several farmhouses, a number of businesses, 7 cottages, a section of the Crow's Nest Railway, and an entire cemetery. And with it, it also...
they were already dead.
They were already dead. With it also brought this huge cloud of white limestone powder that filled the air of the entire area, making visibility near impossible for hours after the rock slide hit. To put it fully into perspective for you, the amount of rock that fell, if you were to take all of that and put it together to form a wall, that wall would be 6.5 feet wide, 20 feet tall, and stretch all the way from Victoria, British Columbia to Halifax, Nova Scotia for a total of 2,788 miles long.
What the fuck?
Down the side of a mountain in under 2 minutes.
That's almost across...
That's the entirety of Canada, essentially.
The entirety of Canada?
Yeah. It's huge.
Jesus.
Just an absolutely massive amount of rock fell off of the side of Turtle Mountain that morning.
Was there a mountain left?
There is still mountain left, and you can still, we're going to talk about it more when we get, to the aftermath of it, but the area where it slid looks like it's covered in rubble. Like, they haven't cleaned it up, so to speak. It's just all kind of there, and the side of the mountain looks quite,
that
blank
tonnage,
at this point.
You're not... Where would you move it to?
There's
Where
nothing
would you move?
You can do. Yep. Residents of Frank awoke in the wee hours of the morning to this absolute chaos and pandemonium. Survivors described the sound like steam howling under pressure. It was so loud that it was recorded being heard as far away as Cochrane, 100 miles to the north.
Yeah, I believe
Just
it.
the sound of it. Citizens in hearing range poured into the streets, many thinking the mine must have exploded or that it was, the end of the fucking world. There was a number of the world is ending going on at that point. The slide buried completely 2 square miles of the valley, ranging from 46 to 150 feet deep.
Fuck.
Homes, cottages, work camps, farms, businesses all went under, many of which still had sleeping residents inside. And when this stuff came down, it looked almost like lightning in a lot of ways because the rocks were bouncing off of each other, creating sparks and tongues of flame. So it really did look like the end of the world to anyone who saw it and anyone who's looking at it at the end, because it's just like
wild.
All this craziness. And I never thought of a rock slide doing that, but it makes sense when you think about it.
Yeah.
When rocks bounce off of each other, they do
blow my
create
mind
flames.
again.
So it is pandemonium, end of the world, like chaos. And just on a because I find it really amusing, there was a man named Mormon Bill who lived in the town.
Was that his nickname?
That's his nickname. And he was...
Mormon Bill. I'm guessing he was a Mormon.
He was described as, quote, a local character by one of the other survivors, which just gives you a picture of the kind of person he would be with that kind of name and that kind of descriptor for him.
A local character.
He was on his way home from the bar when the sound and the wind hit him. He wasn't in the south part of Frank. He was in the part of Frank that didn't get destroyed. He was knocked completely off of his feet by the wind. But in less than 2 minutes, the sound and the wind had stopped, though the street was now filling with people in their night attire just kind of panicking and assuming it was the end of the world. Bill, being Mormon Bill, apparently assumed that the sensations he had just felt and the things he was seeing was the result of too much booze, and promptly went home and went to sleep and slept until the next afternoon.
Oh, shit. I've had too much.
Yep.
Fuck.
Others awoke and saw the dust of limestone from their windows and assumed it was a fire and that someone else would put it out and went back to bed. So you got a lot of the town...
Someone else will deal with it.
Coming out, trying to figure out what's going on, and a lot of the town kind of no, not doing this.
It's too early for this shit. I'm going back to bed. You know what? I can relate to that. You said what, 4:30 in the morning?
4:10 in the morning.
4:10 in the morning. Now fuck that. It's too early.
It is too early. It's
too
much.
early for that bullshit.
With that, though, even the people who were out and trying to figure out what was going on, it took time for the full extent to be realized, even by the residents who were trying to figure out what was going on, because they just don't have a lot of ability to go out in 1903 to figure out exactly how bad this is. They knew it was bad, but it took a long time to figure out how bad it was. The main local constable was awakened by the boom, but it wasn't until he found a train crew that had barely escaped the rock slide that he was able to put 2 and 2 together and figure out that it was a rock slide at all. And even then, the crew who had escaped didn't realize the magnitude of what had happened yet.
Huh.
Once dawn broke and folks were able to really see as the dust started to settle down and the sun was coming up, they had a citizens meeting and organized search parties to go out and try and find anyone in the homes that had been crushed, or there was about 20 miners that were inside of the mine when this rock slide happened.
Yeah, they're gone.
So they made 2 groups of people to go search and try and figure these things out. And they were greeted with absolute horror. The side of the mountain was completely gone. Sheer rock face was there, and at the bottom, just jagged piles of rocks. The mine bridge, over which a locomotive had barely escaped, lay twisted and broken, and the mine's entrance was difficult to find with all of the changes in topography.
Jesus.
Once they finally did find it, though, the citizens started working to try and dislodge all of the rock and rescue the miners, who they assumed were still inside, hoped were still inside.
Yeah.
Others went to parts of town to try and rescue folks within their home. Meanwhile, word began to spread through the country. Cranbrook and Calgary and even further started hearing about what was going on and trying to send people. Initial reports were more fantasy than not. Descriptions ranged from a gigantic mine explosion to an earthquake. Some said there was 100 bodies already found. Some said there were 50 people trapped inside the mine. Once Canadian Pacific Railway heard, they promptly sent a special train to Cranbrook to evacuate the community and get them out of there before anything else happened. At the same time, once the Dominion government of Canada found out what was going on, they sent William Pierce to the town, who was the chief inspector of surveys from the Department of the Interior, to take charge of the situation, along with 10 more police officers to help the small beleaguered department kind of figure out what was going on and get things going. So all that to say, immediate step up.
Yeah.
With that said, this is Catastrophe Chronicles. It has to be one asshole. So the Calgary...
Yes, enter the asshole.
The Calgary Herald's correspondent who showed up to the town showed up in a perfect 3-piece suit, set himself up in one of the local hotels, and promptly began sending out reports without verifying them whatsoever. Just, here's what happened, here's what happened. Didn't even go to where the rock slide was to see for himself. And his actions can be traced to be the number one reason why so many rumors and urban legends surround this to this day. Like this one dude's actions.
So kind of like our modern media newscasters.
And I think this is worse than a lot of our modern media because it was, he didn't even try, right? At least people, there's a lot.
He just sat in his hotel room and made shit up?
He did, basically. He just made shit up and sent it out. And I think it's fucked up. I don't like that guy.
Yeah, it's pretty fucked up.
Yeah. Like you said before, you hit the nail on the head. There was so much rock and so little ability to be able to move it. Despite the real effort to recover bodies and rescue those who are still alive, much of the people who died are still there to this day, under 150 feet of rock because they couldn't get to them. They couldn't get the bodies. They couldn't get people out.
That's 150 feet of rock. That's...
And you have to remember, too, there was extremely poor visibility. There was still small rocks coming down pretty much throughout the entirety of the day because not everything fell in those 2 minutes and then it was silent. There's still mini rock slides going on. There's still this cloud of dust. Well, and this is 1903. They're not bringing bulldozers in.
No, and anytime you have, an earthquake of any kind, like there's aftershocks, like there's probably a real danger of more of the mountain coming down on them.
So this was not caused by an earthquake. So there
no, this was right. You said it was the freeze and the thaw.
We're going to get into the official reasons, but yes, that was definitely part of it. And just in general, Turtle Mountain was extremely unstable. And at some point something was going to happen, but this was not, it wasn't like there was an earthquake that caused it. This was just, it finally fell after years of being unstable. But even so, even without aftershocks, there's still mini rock slides going on. There's still poor visibility. Most of how they dug through things in 1903 was dynamite. And nobody wanted to stick dynamite in the rocks to rescue people. Like how is it going to help to blow them up?
Yep.
It's not going to do anything. So, bananas. I'm going to take a minute to kind of go through some of the personal stories of people who survived. Because there's a lot of really, really interesting, just banana pants things that went on. I already mentioned the train crew that barely escaped. That is a super crazy cool story. This train crew was at the mine at 4:10 in the morning, and they were just finishing loading up and about to take it down into Frank itself to unload all of their equipment so that people could get it for the next day's work or something like that. The train crew had just finished hooking up all of the coal cars to the engine at the tipple when suddenly they heard a low rumble on Turtle Mountain. Taking no chances, Ben Murtigroyd, a train engineer, shouted a warning to the brakemen, and then they both jogged beside the train and rammed the throttle at full speed before jumping on and careening down the mountain with the rock slide following behind them.
Oh, Jesus.
The brakemen ended up having to hold on to the handrails on the side of the train, essentially like just whoosh, through the air.
Like a flag in the wind?
Pretty much. And the train rolled to safety across a bridge into Crow's Nest River, and that bridge was destroyed right behind them. It's the bridge I described earlier in the episode.
That's some movie cinematic shit.
They barely fucking made it. Now, inside of the mine, well, there was 20 miners who were at the mine that day. There were 17 of them that ended up surviving.
Damn.
3 of the miners were not inside the mine. They were outside of the mine having lunch, and those 3 unfortunately died. But the 17 miners inside of the mine at the time of the rock slide survived. The rock slide blocked off their entrance. So they were stuck in there, but it didn't collapse the mine itself. So they decided to try and dig up and out through the coal seam itself to go straight up to get out of the mountain, right?
All right.
The men worked in pairs or in threes for hours, cutting through that coal seam, hoping that it would get them out of the mine. While they were doing that, though, the air quickly started to become toxic, which slowed their progress. And eventually, there were only 3 miners who were able to continue digging.
Well, because they don't have any airflow now.
They didn't have any airflow. But those 3 miners managed to finish digging and get fresh air. And unfortunately, the first tunnel they dug, they couldn't get out of it, but it did get them fresh air. So they were able to keep going and eventually find a way to dig themselves out of the mine. And they got out of the mine and pulled their compatriots out around 5 o'clock the next day. So it took them a little over 12 hours to dig out of the mine. And
they weren't rescued. They rescued themselves.
Well, then they were rescued off the side of the mountain because they were spotted by that rescue crew that was at the entrance of the mine trying to dig them out. And they spotted the 3 guys there, and then they went and they were able to pull out all of the other folks that were there.
That's wild.
Absolutely bananas. Unfortunately, one of the surviving miners, William Warrington, had to be evacuated using a plank because he fractured his leg while digging for freedom. When he emerged, he found out that his wife and all 7 of his children had perished in the slide. He eventually went on to remarry and have more children, but you're never the same after something like that. In another, instance of just miraculous survival, the Canadian Pacific Railway was recruiting more and more men before the disaster took place to build a fully functional rail station in Frank because the town was growing so much.
Right.
And many of them were chilling at the train station, waiting to be taken to Frank to be able to build all that stuff going on. 12 of them had already arrived in Frank, but 128 were due to arrive that morning on the train. And the train that was supposed to pick them up and take them didn't show up.
Oh,
so they didn't
then.
end up getting into town. And they were initially pretty upset about it and complaining until they realized that, if the train had shown up, they would have been right in the path of the landslide.
Right, because the train station was wiped out.
Just the train station. Well, the area where the full train station was going to be built was wiped out.
Oh, okay.
Now, another passenger train called the Spokane Flyer was due to head into Frank on the way for Lethbridge early in the morning of April 29th. And there were not many folks at this point who were aware that the train tracks were completely fucked at this point, or even that the slide had happened, because they were supposed to come in at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
So it was, and they would have been coming around a corner to
nothing.
Well, not just nothing,
but
rocks.
Yeah.
I mean, absolute train wreck would have happened if they had been able to go, because there was absolutely no warning. One of the men who was on that train that barely escaped is Sid Choquette.
Okay.
And when he realized that the telegram wires had also been wiped out in the town, he and his buddy Lowe's decided to run to try and warn this train and flag it down so that it didn't come into town and end up crashing.
Yeah.
He and Lowe's ran for about 2 kilometers, little 1.6 miles-ish. Yeah. Lowe's ended up running out of breath, but they were dodging rock falls. They were running through this fog of limestone, and Sid eventually made it and was able to flag down the Spokane Flyer and make it so that it would stop and didn't run into it. And Sid is one of the heroes of the story. He's still quite famous in the area. We're going to talk about it a little bit more, but there's an entire festival about Sid now.
Oh, really?
Because it's such a cool story, because it was a big deal. He ran a long way through very, very difficult circumstances to be able to warn this train off and keep them from dying. Lillian Clark was 15 years old when she went to work for Frank Hotel on April 28th. Her employer offered her a room at the hotel for the night because she was working so late. And for the first time ever, her parents agreed to let her stay there. And because of that, she was not home when the landslide hit. When the rock slide hit, it completely wiped out her home.
Damn.
Her home was destroyed. Her mother, along with all 6 of her siblings, died in that home. And her father was Alfred Clark, and he was unfortunately one of the 3 miners who was outside when the rock slide hit.
Ooh.
So she lost her entire family in one go.
Ellen, survivor's guilt there.
Very much so. Ellen Thornley and her brother John Thornley decided to spend the night at the same hotel Ellen worked at, and their home was also destroyed in the landslide. And they only were there because this was her last night in town visiting her brother, and they decided to go have a nice time at the hotel instead of spending it at home. Lots of stories like that. When the slide hit, Ellen Thornley was tossed completely from her bed by the force of the wind and the pressure, even though no rocks had hit Frank's hotel. And when she came outside, she found folks crying in the street, thinking that the end times had come. I said it a little bit before, but the slide spawned a ton of urban myths.
Yeah.
One of the most popular ones is one called Frank's Baby, or Frankie's Slide.
Okay.
And the myth essentially says that an infant or a toddler, definitely a little girl, who was the only survivor of the disaster and was found completely unharmed sitting on a boulder by herself. Urban legend.
Yeah.
Of what happened. That's what the myth says. The story is obviously untrue, but it does have some loose basis in facts. And there's 3 kind of main stories that it likely comes from.
Okay.
The first one would be Fernie Watkins. Fernie Watkins was a little toddler. She was found after being completely tossed out of her house by the wind, most likely in a pile of rocks by pit boss Edgar Ashe. completely unharmed. Gladys Enos was a 27-month-old baby who was found in the mud by her mother, Lucy, and her mother saved her because she had all kinds of mud and just junk caked in her mouth and her nose, and her mother cleared it all out.
Oh, wow.
When they were found, they were trapped under a beam, but they were able to be dug out, and Lucy and her mother both survived. The most likely origin of Frankie's baby would be 15-month-old Marion Leitch.
Okay.
Marion Leitch was tossed entirely from her house and found in a pile of hay, completely unharmed.
That's
15
wild.
months old, completely tossed out of her house. The urban myth often refers to the Boulder baby as Frankie Slide, saying that that's her name. And there's variations of it include things like a baby being found on a rock, in the attic, in a pile of hay, in debris, or in her mother's arms. So like any
sounds
one
like
of those
all of
three
those.
girls fit it, but 15-month-old tiny baby Marion being tossed and was entirely unharmed.
Yeah.
A lot of people are kind of like, that's probably the main part of that. But yeah, pretty nutty. So on the note of the Watkins family, we're going to talk a little bit about in another house, James Warrington was found. He had been sleeping at home when the rock slide hit. Once he was rescued, he told rescuers that he could feel something soft behind him or beneath him. So they started to dig carefully underneath where he had been.
Yeah.
And they found Mrs. Watkins, Marion's mother, who had been flung entirely out of her house as well, but went the opposite direction and ended up in Warrington's house. And she survived.
That she was thrown from her house into someone else's house.
Yep. And then he was like tumbled around. So he ended up on top of her. And that's Marion's mother.
So crazy.
It's bananas how like violent this is and how violent avalanches can be. Because you don't really think about the wind when you think about rock slides, but the wind tosses everything in front of the rock slide and then it gets buried in rubble. So nothing is where it should be when you're digging around in a rock slide.
Wow.
Unfortunately. Oh, and then for the Watkins family, there was also 2 teenage children in the home. Neither one of them were tossed out of the home, but both survived with minor injuries. They were able to dig themselves out of the home.
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah.
I can't imagine waking up buried and being like, well, I mean, there's nothing else you could do other than try to dig out.
You can do, yeah. But the Watkins father was one of the 17 miners who survived as well. So that whole family survived. Pretty miraculous circumstances in nutty ways. Lester Johnson felt the wind lift his house entirely off of its foundation and then drop it back down before the rock slide hit and, wiped it out at that point. He remembered nothing else after the rock slide hit until he woke up under 2 boulders that had crashed together in like a tent over him, preventing him from getting massively injured from
lucky.
That. But he had been kind of impaled by a piece of wood
Maybe
from
not so
inside
lucky.
of his house. So he woke up and then passed out again.
Yeah.
And then he woke up again around like 2:00 that afternoon, and he was able to see Sam Ennis digging out his neighbors from the Leitch home, so he saw Sam Ennis digging out the Leitch family, which is where one of those little girls that was tossed out into the pile of hay.
Yeah.
He managed to crawl out at this point, but none of his clothing made it out with him. And a lot of people joked with him for the rest of his life that he looked like a newborn child being born crawling out of those 2 boulders naked.
Except for the impairment.
Except for being stabbed. Yeah, so his penetrating injury from the wood in his home meant that he had to be taken via wheelbarrow to the local doctor.
Oh, that
because they had no other.
Suck.
He passed out.
Yeah, that's pretty jostling. Yep. Oh, man.
Now, the Leitch family, which is the little baby that was tossed out into the hay, had a really fascinating story around it as well. Marion was tossed out into that pile of hay, and inside the house, rescuers were able to find her 2 sisters, Jessie and Rosemary, who were pinned on their bed with a ceiling joist resting just right between them, not injuring either one of them. So they couldn't get out. They had to be dug out, but things just fell without touching them, and they survived completely uninjured.
That's wild.
Unfortunately, in another spot of the 3-room cottage, the children's parents and their 4 brothers lay dead under the rubble. So the 3 little girls survived, but the parents and the brothers unfortunately passed away. Rescuers also found trapper Andrew Grisick wrapped in his makeshift tent, clutching an iron frying pan in his hand. When they rolled him over, his scalp peeled off like a skin of an onion.
Ooh, so I'm not laughing now. Yeah.
Sorry, not sorry. Also in the path of the slide, the Banzimer and Ennis families survived the destruction of their homes. The survivors were all brought to Dr. Malcolm Son's house, and he and his nurse, Miss Grassick, cared for the injured. On the day of on April 29th, most of the businesses in town shut their doors, both out of respect and because, well, nobody really wanted to shop that day. But the hotel bars had one of their best days in history, thanks to people wanting to forget what they had seen.
Oh, yeah.
And in a number of survivor accounts I read, lots of people mentioned that, which just made me appreciate the people living in that town all the more. Yeah, it was a bad day, but the bar did well. That's bananas. So, of the people that died, only 18 to 19 bodies were able to be recovered from the slide itself.
Damn. Yeah, buried under 150 feet of rock.
Many of the bodies that were recovered were completely unrecognizable. The number of residents is placed at 600 for population that lived in the town, but the real number is wishy-washy.
Yeah.
You get a lot of transients in a booming mine town.
Yeah.
Both people that are coming in for a little bit to work and leaving for work, especially with that new rail station being built. So, not totally sure exactly how many people died. Not even totally sure how many people lived in the area. But roughly 60 to 110 people are about what likely died. Okay. 18 to 19 of them were found. 12 of them were found in the initial days right after the rock slide. And then in 1924, there was a crew building a new road in the area that unearthed 6 or 7 skeletons that were proven to be victims of the slide, bringing the total number of bodies up to 18 or 19. I couldn't quite tell if it was 6 or 7, but I did see that the bodies found were believed to be that of Lillian Clark's family, the girl who was at the hotel that night.
Okay. Probably because of proximity to where her house was, or
in the size of the skeletons, because mother and 6 children, I believe, had a lot to do with it. And I think I saw both 6 and 7 in multiple different places. Okay. So it was 1924. I'm guessing the records maybe just weren't that great. I don't know. But I did see most people assumed that it was the Clark family that was found. So take that for what it's worth. There were 23 men, women, and children who were actually rescued from the rubble. 6 adults, 16 children, and a baby who were rescued and treated out at Dr. Malcolmson's house. 23 is a pretty good number to pull them out. Most of them were pulled out from kind of the edges of the rubble.
That's what I would assume.
But 23 people were pulled out. The slide itself destroyed 7 miners' cottages, 6 of them inhabited at the time, on Frank's easternmost street, Manitoba Avenue. All of the surface buildings in the Canadian American Coal and Coke Company were destroyed. The McVeigh and Pupor construction camp for the railway was completely destroyed. A dairy farm, 2 ranches, a shoe store, a livery stable, the Frank Cemetery, and 1.2 miles of minecart track was destroyed. 1.2 miles of the Canadian Pacific Railway line was destroyed, and 1 mile of the just completed Frank and Gracie Mountain Railway line was destroyed. Survivors in the town were evacuated pretty quickly by that inspector who came in, who then surveyed the area and determined that it was unlikely that there would be another major rock slide, so many of them came back within days of the rock slide. The mine reopened within weeks of the disaster on May 30th, so a little over a month after the disaster happened. And Frank's population not only recovered, but actually grew over the next couple of years. When the mine was reopened, miners went inside and were shocked to find Charlie, one of the mine horses, still alive inside of the mine on May 30th.
The horse lived.
Charlie managed to survive by drinking the dammed water that had flowed into the mine, sucking salt from his harness, and gnawing wood from the mine carts and support timbers. The rescuers were so excited and happy to find Charlie, they welcomed him with a huge meal of oats and brandy, which Charlie promptly gorged himself to death on and died within 24 hours.
Oh, God.
Love you.
What the fuck?
Sorry, guys. This is real. It's history. I don't make the history.
This horse lives through it all only to be fed to death.
Really? I mean, I feel like for Charlie, though,
that's a good way to go.
Wasn't unhappy about that after the month he had.
No, you said oats and
brandy.
Yep. So they got the horse drunk off his ass.
Is brandy, I don't know if they mean brandy. We'll have to ask our horse people. Do they give horses brandy? Or is it some other kind of oat? I don't know, but it said brandy in the book that I read.
I can see miners giving the horse fucking brandy.
Could be. I don't know. Either way, poor Charlie ate so much he died. Sorry, Charlie. The stretch of railway that had been destroyed was also entirely rebuilt within 3 weeks. Many of the original townsfolk didn't end up coming back to town because they feared another rock slide, but many did. The Frank population grew from 600 in 1903 to a population of 1,178 within 3 years in 1906.
Damn.
A new residential subdivision had to be added northwest of the original town across the railway tracks to accommodate the growing population, and it was placed pretty far away from the mountain itself for obvious reasons.
At least they learned that.
They did learn that much. The town also added a new zinc smelter, a new 3-story hotel, and a small zoo in those 3 years. Fears, however, persisted, as did lobbying the government about the dangers of living at the bottom of Turtle Mountain. In 1911, the government ordered folks to move because a study by the Royal Commission determined it was too risky, and over the next several years, the parts of town in the potential impact zone of the North Peak were slowly dismantled and moved to a new town site across the Canadian Pacific Railway lines or destroyed entirely.
Okay.
The section that was moved and destroyed is called Old Frank now.
Okay.
And there's no buildings there, obviously, but
Right.
it exists and you can visit the area. And the new town on maps and everything is New Frank.
I mean, that's better than other disasters we've got.
I feel like I was reading this going, damn, they did a good job.
Yeah.
I'm looking for the thing to be mad about, and I ain't mad.
Yeah, they're like, no, this is dangerous. We're going to move this. Instead of being like, nah, it's okay.
And they didn't even need, there wasn't some big outcry about it. Like, there was people lobbying the government, but they weren't getting real spicy about it. And the government kind of went, okay. And they started that survey by, I think it was 1908. So within 5 years or so. And it was completed in 1911. And when it was completed, they immediately took the recommendations of the survey and moved everything.
That's fucking
and the government
wild.
Paid
that
for
shouldn't be wild.
But it is. Anyways, Frank still, the mine itself was closed in 1917 too.
Okay.
They got rid of it at that point. Frank still exists today, albeit in a slightly different form. About 200 people still live there.
Really?
Yeah. Rubble still covers about 300 hectares of valley and draws around 100,000.
Hectares.
It draws around 100,000 visitors a year to see it and to visit the visitor center.
Really?
It's a big popular tourist site. Frank's Slide was designated a provincial historical resource as well as a burial ground in 1977. And in 1985, the Interpretive Center, or the Visitors Center, was opened. That explains both Frank's Slide and the coal mining history of the area. And there's lots of, the website is really cool. A lot of my information is straight up from the website.
Okay.
Because it was a lot of good information there. The area itself has a number of pullouts and spots for folks to stop and go out into the rubble and stand around. And pretty bananas. Pretty fucking bananas. During the pandemic, only around 50,000 people visited a year, but it still was a very popular place for people to visit.
It's still a lot.
Turtle Mountain is also now the host of an ambitious rock climbing competition called the Tour de Frank.
Oh, wow.
It's part of a bouldering festival where folks tackle the shredded mountain face and rubble blanketing the old town site. There's also...
Climbing Turtle Mountain does not sound like the...
It sounds like I love Canadians.
Yeah,
I just love the idea that they're like, we're going to commemorate it by climbing it. I don't know. I think that couldn't be me, but rock on. And then the other part that I thought was... No, listen to this part. The other part that I thought was crazy cool is there's this challenging trail run called the Run of the Rocks, which was created for Sid Choquette, the one that ran to warn that other train.
Yeah.
And it takes the same path that he did. And you have to run through all of the rocks, and it's the same path that he did.
Oh, wow.
And it's to commemorate him, and they do it every year as part of this bouldering festival, which I
cool.
think that's super neat. Now, at the time, people pretty much immediately blamed coal mining for the rock slide. We talked about the history of coal mining in Canada, that there are disasters, and people pretty much, they assumed that coal mining is the reason that this fell down. And between that and the fact that the winter had been wetter than usual, the night had that cold snap, seemed right.
Yeah.
Later, though, scientists did a number of different studies, and they concluded that the primary reason for the rock slide was that underlying unstable structure. It was going to be a problem no matter what, but they said the coal mining was probably a secondary factor. So, yes, the coal mining was part of it, but it wasn't the main reason. It was something that exacerbated the main reason.
Yeah.
Made it happen a little bit sooner than it would have, but it was going to happen sometime in that time frame anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean, from your description, you got a mountain sitting on like shale and
It was unstable, and it's still unstable
Sandstone.
to this day, which we're okay.
Oh, no.
Since the 1930s, geologists from the Alberta Geological Survey constantly monitor the mountain, measuring fissure growth, tracking shifts, and identifying potential danger zones. Geologists say that the next slide isn't an if, it's a when.
Mm-hmm.
The top of the mountain seems to be held up by a lot of luck, still. Especially the south peak. The north peak is what slid down into Frank. The south peak.
Still there.
Still there.
Ooh.
The south peak has a number of those cracks inside of it, but upon further studies and looking at it and all of that, they assume or they think if that slide and all of the potentially unstable areas slide, that slide will be about 1/6 the size of what happened at Frank's slide, which is still fucking massive.
Yeah.
But not quite as crazy.
You couldn't build a wall all the way across Canada with it.
Yeah. And this was another part that I was like ready to be mad at the Canadian government. I was all set for it because I was reading this article that was put out for the 100-year anniversary, so in 2003. And in this article, the woman that we quoted at the top of the episode was talking about how she and a lot of other people from the interpretive center in that area had been trying to get more sophisticated equipment installed. They'd been doing consistent surveys and tracking it, but they didn't have modern equipment as of the 100-year anniversary. So they had been asking the government to put that stuff in, and there was a little bit of pushback because that seismic equipment, that tracking equipment could cost up to $100, up to $1 million.
Okay.
And there's a real lack of urgency because the next slide could happen in 10 years or it could take 100,000 years. Right. There's a lot of like back and forth. And when I originally wrote up my notes, I had put in like these motherfuckers didn't put in the seismic equipment. Can you believe it? And decided I would go ahead and go look it up because I was like, oh, the article was written in 2003. I should go.
They put it in, haven't they?
Yeah, they totally put it in. And more than they asked for. So there's incredibly sophisticated tracking monitoring stations there that is tracked 24 hours in real time by the Alberta Geological Survey Society. And they keep eyes on all of it. And they have an entire warning system through the area because there's about 20 homes that are within the path of where the most likely rock slide would be so that everyone can be alerted if there's any kind of danger that happens.
Isn't it weird that it doesn't feel real when
we're too American does their job. We're way too fucking American for this episode. Coal is still mined in Canada to this day, with 24 permitted coal mines located in Alberta, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and Nova Scotia. However, the use of coal has been declining since 2005, and there has only been 14 fully active mines as of February 2020.
Okay. Despite
this, coal mines continue to operate in Canada, and ports on the country's west coast ship significant amounts of both Canadian and U.S. coal abroad. Gladys Enos, the 27-month-old who was saved by her mother Lucy, was the last living survivor of Frank's slide when she passed away in 1995 in Bellevue, Washington.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. And every year, when the spring and winter rains come, the mountain drops a small amount of rock, a yearly reminder that Turtle Mountain is still the mountain that moves.
Whew.
And that is the tale, Frank's slide, which I think is a great one. And I love that I'm going through it. And the whole time I'm like, I was ready when I started looking into it because I had always heard it was coal mining, right?
Yeah, so you're looking for that corporate greed concept.
So I was ready to be mad about the coal mining, and then it was like, oh, no, I'm not mad about that. Wait, you know what I'm mad about? I'm mad that the government didn't respond well.
Oh, wait,
nope,
no.
Not mad about that.
Yeah.
Wait, you know what I'm mad about? I'm mad that they didn't install the sophisticated monitoring systems. God damn it, I'm not mad about that. So, like, I'm sorry, y'all. A lot of times we have the rage bait. I got no rage bait. Everyone did a good job.
Hey, you know what? It's
refreshing.
That's refreshing. It's good to see that somewhere in the world that happens.
It is. It was good. And I'm always so ready. And it was a good reminder to me to take a step back. And not everything is an industrial disaster. Not everything is someone's fault.
Yeah.
Sometimes things go bad and people do respond well. And, you know, like the Hartford Circus Fire was like that, too, where they had the full plan in place.
Yeah.
And were ready to go. There was mistakes made. That one for sure. More mistakes made for that one than was for this one.
And this
but
one
that's
just
2 in a row
happened.
now that it's like, all right.
Yeah.
Guess I don't hate you today. So anyways, God bless Canada. Good job, guys. I want to do more Canadian disasters so I can feel better about life. It's just so nice.
It's so nicey.
That's what Jon Stewart was calling them, the labradoodle of allies. And I feel like they're also the labradoodle of disasters, where it's just like they made a party for the area to celebrate the heroes of it. And it sounds like fun.
Right.
And it sounds respectful and fun at the same time, right?
Yeah.
That's really fucking cool. So yeah, that's where I'm sitting with it. That's what I like.
That was a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was fun. I mean, fun to do, fun to hear about. Obviously not, sad when people die. Of course. Tragedies are tragic, but thank you for sharing that.
So like I said, hopefully by the time this episode comes out, Canada's still Canada. Things are still going on.
We're still cool with Canada.
I also thought, Canada is one of the main reasons that, the Geneva Conventions exist. So I really did expect more. And I know I keep harping on that, but, damn. All right.
Well, I feel like that's because it's the original when you fuck around, you find out.
I think that's because as a society, they know what they're doing in all regards.
Yeah.
They just have it together. Yeah, that's where we're at. So I think
and they're also just imaginative.
They're just imaginative. I did really like all of the stories, too. I really enjoyed learning about how that air mass goes in front. I knew a little bit about that from the other ones, but that was really interesting. Yeah, the flowing crazy. Lightning going down the hill.
That's wild.
For 90 seconds. That's a long time.
I've seen landslides. I've never seen that.
I don't know that I've ever seen a landslide in person.
No, maybe I've seen mudslides.
I've seen California. We've all seen mudslides in person if you live there, but not an actual rock slide. I've seen the after effects of it while going to visit national parks and whatnot in California, and visiting the Rocky Mountains too when I was a kid. And those always blew my mind, seeing the debris field of a rock slide, because they are huge. And in this particular case, there were rocks that were the size of homes.
That's
coming down the mountain. Just absolutely enormous amount of energy, enormous weight, enormous just pressure coming down. And that is mind-boggling.
Yeah, and I never, like you said, I never thought about the airwave.
Yeah.
That, because when something moves into occupy a space, it has to displace whatever else is there.
Yes.
That's, wow.
And 70 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyway, sleep well. Hopefully you don't live near a mountain.
We don't, thank God. Or I'd be worried now.
We do live near trees. Maybe the trees will get you. Anyways, we're fine. It's good. We have socials. We are on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We are on Threads. We're on Blue Sky and TikTok. Feel free to get in touch with us on any one of those. We love talking to you. We love seeing things. I'm not posting as much right now just because we've been really busy. But I'll get back to it at some point. And you can always message me on there because I like talking. We have an email. It is catastrophechroniclespod@gmail.com. Please feel free to email us. Let us know what your thoughts are and let us know what's going on. And our website is www.catastrophe-chronicles.com. If you can, please rate and review. That really does help.
Yep, wherever you get your pods.
Wherever you get your pods. And with that,
stay safe, everyone.
And stay curious.